As some of you may know, I have an 8-year-old son. He has always been a very deep thinker, but when he was just 5, he began to have very serious questions about life and about existence. He would ask me questions about the meaning of life and the meaning of death, and if we were actually really alive. In particular, he was interested in understanding how we know what we know, and if other people know the same things that we do. I, however, couldn't answer these questions for him. And I didn't know this at the time, but he was beginning to touch on the idea of a philosophy called Solipsism, which is what I'll be talking about today. First, I'll explain what Solipsism is, then I will discuss its theoretical background and some of the founders, and then finally I'll talk about some specific problems associated with Solipsism. Now, has anyone ever heard of Solipsism? I want to take that as a no. So for me, in order to even begin to understand a concept, I have to see it. And since Solipsism is a strange word, I'm going to write it down for you. Okay? And it sounds just like it's spelled. Hold on. Ism, if I can spell. Okay. So it's sol, then lips-ism. Solipsism. Okay? So what is solipsism? Well, according to a peer-reviewed Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, solipsism is the philosophical theory that believes that one's own mind is all that can be sure to exist. Now, what that means is that for me, my existence, anything that I experience, be it physical objects, people, events, anything is constructed by me as part of my subconsciousness. So Philip Gerrans, in his book entitled The Measure of Madness, said the following: "There is nothing in the solipsist's world but her own thoughts. Agency is reduced to nothing other than the flow of mental events. She is all-powerful, but in a virtual world only. All the solipsist does is watch herself thinking. The result is a kind of omnipotent passivity." It's a very egocentric theory, and the true metaphysical solipsists do not believe in the existence of anyone other than themselves. So all things, all people, all ideas, everything in existence is created within their own minds. So there are 2 philosophers that must be discussed when talking about the origins of solipsism. The first is a man named Gorgias, and the second is René Descartes. Gorgias is a Greek philosopher, and Descartes is from French, and they're from very different time periods of the world. So first, Gorgias, I'm going to write his name down too, so you can remember it. And I looked up how to pronounce it, so it might not look like it's said right, but it is. So it's Gorgias, and he is from 400 BC, around that. So before Christ, really long time ago, around the same time as Plato. Again, according to the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, he was considered to be the founder of Solipsism, and his main philosophy was that all existence is incomprehensible, and that nothing truly exists because we can't prove that it exists. Now, on the other hand, we have Descartes, and I'll write his name too. And Descartes was actually much sooner. He is from 1640. So I thought this was interesting to kind of point out that these guys are 2,000 years apart, but they're still coming around the same conclusions. Now Descartes, he is credited with being the father of modern philosophy, and he said the following phrase, which I'm sure you've all heard, and it's, "I think, therefore I am." So in his Meditation 2, I'm going to paraphrase a section from it, and he said, "I have convinced myself that there is nothing in the world. No sky, no earth, no minds, no bodies. Doesn't it follow that I don't exist? No, surely I must exist. It's me who's convinced of something." Does that sound like solipsism to you? Because it does to me. Solipsism is a very interesting philosophical ideology, but it certainly isn't without its issues. So I'm going to talk about 2 of them. The first has to do with solipsism and morality, and the second with a psychological disorder that's associated with solipsism. So, solipsism and morality. If solipsism is true, then practically all standards for moral behavior are completely meaningless. So if there's no such thing as other humans, and everything around us is a figment of my mind, then it doesn't matter what happens to anyone else, because they're not real, right? They're just in our minds. So that brings us to something called solipsism syndrome, which is a psychological state in which a person feels that the world only exists in their own minds and nothing around them is real. It can create feelings of detachment within the world, as well as extreme loneliness and indifference toward other people. It's a really big potential concern for people who live in outer space or who live in prolonged periods of isolation. It's not very common. So just in closing, I'm glad that we were able to discuss the philosophical ideology of Solipsism and hope that you were able to learn a little bit about this unique theory. Today we learned the definition of Solipsism, we learned about two of its founders, Gorgas and Descartes, and learned about some complications that can arise due to Solipsism. In close, I would like to leave you with a quote from Thomas Nagel from his A Very Short Introduction to Philosophy. He said, "If you can't prove that anything exists outside your own mind, is it all right to go on believing in the external world anyway?"